October 18, 2018, 6:42 p.m., Colorado Springs, Colorado. Fluorescence hummed. Paper rustled. A young woman named Maya Calderon signed in, then went quiet as her stepfather, Victor, answered for her. The ultrasound machine warmed. The printer spooled and stalled. What happened to Maya Calderon inside that clinic, and why did she leave without a trace? 5 years later, a routine software migration will surface one image and a note that reopen everything. The clock was precise. The room was not. The record showed compliance. The eyes in the room did not. A file would survive. A witness would not forget. Someone had edited time. Dr. Noah Klein remembered the smell before he remembered the image. Antiseptic. Warm plastic. Thermal paper. In 2018, his clinic had been busy, the kind of autumn evening when coughs and broken fingers overlapped with routine scans. He held the transducer like a metronome. He marked measurements. He kept his voice even. Next to him, Aria Montoya, the nurse with a tidy bun and sharper memory, noted that Maya deferred every answer to Victor. She watched the girls. No, the woman's. Hands stay still on her hoodie while Victor's voice filled the room like steam, dense, directionless, meant to fog. Aria tried to ask Maya simple questions. Diet, sleep, the last time she'd felt well. Victor intercepted each one, like a goalie catching soft shots. Klein worked the probe, followed the angle of bone and shadow, and felt a small hitch. It wasn't dramatic. It was a syncopation, an annoyance to the machine but a warning to the trained ear. He recommended hospital monitoring. He explained risk without drama, urgency without fear. He cited policy, not panic. The printer half spat a strip, jittered, then stopped. The last line of data hung like a sentence cut off mid-thought. Klein tapped the casing and moved on to verbal instructions, assuming the paper would catch up. Maya's eyes lifted once, quick as a bird's. She seemed to breathe for an answer, then didn't. 2 days later, the contact numbers failed. Mail bounced. The address of record changed its name on the lease and, somehow, its paint color in the property photos. Aria filed a notation. Patient did not present to hospital. Follow-up recommended. It sat in the system like a message in a bottle wedged behind a desk. The holiday season arrived. Cases piled. The winter storm closed schools and roads. The clinic moved on because clinics always do. 5 years later, in 2023, the clinic upgraded its software. Old drives were mirrored. Corrupted folders were coaxed open like stiff joints. That's when Klein saw it, an uncatalogued scan from the hour Maya sat on his table. The still, once thought lost, had returned. It showed measurements that were small for the gestational estimate, and the annotation layer carried a symbol Klein didn't write. In the lower margin, barely visible, was a short arrow that Aria recognized as her private flag, the mark she used when she suspected someone in the room was answering under pressure. It pointed not at an organ, not at a measurement, but at the line where the companion's name had been typed, Victor C. Klein felt something unpleasant and useful, professional shame braided with resolve. He should have insisted they leave for the hospital with a printed referral in hand. He should have walked them there. He should have. A good doctor learns not to drown in should-haves. A better one writes them down and builds a raft. He called Aria. She arrived with coffee and 3 words, "We reopen this." She had kept a copy of her shift notes, handwritten, dated, procedural. Paper ages. Ink oxidizes. Digital records pretend they don't. But the body remembers. The eye remembers. And the small gestures people make when they're trying not to be seen remember, too. Colorado Springs police assigned Lieutenant Rene Salazar to the inquiry. He wasn't interested in sensational narratives. He wanted timestamps, device IDs, and maintenance logs. He wanted to know which probe Klein had used and whether the printer failure created a plausible window for misfiled media. He asked why a patient would vanish after a referral and how a lease could change hands mid-month. He listened when Aria described coercive control without melodrama, triangulated answers, possession of documents, a companion who signed where the patient should sign. He took the note about Victor without raising an eyebrow and asked for corroboration that didn't come from memory. Klein reached out to Dr. Priya Nanda Kumar, an OB-GYN who trained with him years ago and now consulted on complex maternal cases. She pored over the still. She didn't guess. She explained calmly how chronic stress and restricted intake can write themselves into organ curves and pulse intervals, how biology records captivity without needing to say the word. She didn't diagnose a person she hadn't seen. She diagnosed a pattern of risk and repeated a sentence like a mantra. The body is a ledger, it keeps accounts. Arya, fragile and fierce in the same breath, found a copy of a voicemail she'd saved out of habit. It was the clinic line at 9:13 p.m. the night Maya vanished from the schedule. The voice on it was soft, distorted by wind or fear or both. We hear 4 words. Then static. Arya had logged it as a wrong number. Tonight it sounded like a last attempt to be specific. Still here. Please hurry. The caller didn't say where here was. The line cut on a breath. A mystery knows how to dress itself. In crisp forms. In properly filled boxes. In cordial smiles that cover tight knuckles. In unremarkable nights that become anchor points on a timeline. The city moved forward. New developments, new uniforms, new software. The old case waited without complaining, without changing, without asking for attention. It waited in a scan that shouldn't have survived but did, in a symbol that wasn't supposed to be visible but was, in a name that wasn't supposed to matter but does. Salazar requested property records, contractor permits, and utility anomalies for the addresses tied to Victor. The work began at a desk. It never stays there. Klein walked the hallway that night and stood in the room where the printer had stuttered. He placed his palm on the cooled machine as if to ask it to testify. Arya watched his hand linger and said nothing. The hum of the building filled the pause. On October 12, 2023, at 8:06 p.m., the migration task finished. A small folder with a bland name populated in the archive. Inside it, a second image waited, a twin to the first with one crucial difference. The annotation layer bled into a timestamp that didn't match the visit time. Someone had touched this file later. Someone had tried to turn back the clock. The past doesn't erase itself, it edits margins. And sometimes the margins talk. Lieutenant René Salazar didn't blink at rumors. He logged them, weighed them, and moved forward only when something solid clicked. The cold case file on Maya Calderon clicked when the clinic's migration task produced a second still with a mismatched timestamp. It wasn't dramatic. It was a sliver in the timeline, small enough to ignore if you wanted an easy day. He didn't. He scheduled a review at the precinct after hours, the kind of meeting that looks ordinary from the hallway and changes directions once the door shuts. Arya Montoya arrived with a folder she'd never thrown away, edges softened by time and coffee rings. She spread out copies of her shift notes, precisely dated, the handwriting consistent and calm even where her pulse must have jumped. She told Salazar what pressure looks like in a room built for care, a companion folding answers into their own mouth, a patient nodding at statements they never made, the air turning heavy with permission that was never given. She didn't speculate beyond what she'd seen. She didn't need to. The notes had timestamps. The devices had IDs. The printer had a maintenance log that showed an error code that night. The body had left a curve in a graph that shouldn't be that flat. Salazar asked for corroboration outside memory. Dr. Noah Klein produced service tickets from the ultrasound vendor, complete with serial numbers and a technician's signature. He provided the chain of custody for media exports, every external drive labeled, every checksum verified. He admitted the should-haves like someone reciting a creed. He didn't dramatize them. He let the facts bruise on their own. We advised hospital monitoring, he said. They didn't go. He looked at the table rather than anyone's eyes. I didn't walk them there. They brought in Dr. Priya Nanda Kumar for a technical reading that refused theatrics. She traced the still with a capped pen and explained slowly how stress freckles a waveform and how restriction pulls measurements lower than the calendar wants. She emphasized limits. She hadn't examined Maya and wouldn't leap from pixels to diagnoses. But the pattern suggested something long, not sudden. Something daily. Relief burrowed under Klein's shame. Science could speak when he wanted to shout. A voicemail surfaced because Arya didn't delete much. It was from 9:13 p.m. on the day Maya fell out of the schedule. A soft voice, wind-laced, pressed 4 words together as if sprinting across broken glass. "Still here. Please hurry." The caller didn't say where here was. The line cut on a breath that sounded too small and too big at once. Salazar played it twice with the volume low, then set the phone face down as if sound could leak back into the room and rearrange the past. He asked for a trace even knowing 5 years had gnawed the edges of that chance. Elena Ruiz came last, after an hour of pacing in the lobby, after deciding not to cry where strangers could see. She hadn't been in the clinic in years. She knew she wasn't center stage here. She brought a small cardboard key instead, the kind you forget until you need it. "Her storage unit," she said, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. "Paid through autodraft. I couldn't open it without her." The clerk said no. She handed Salazar the key with both hands, as if weight could be split that way. "He never let me near her, but my name's still on a backup contact. They said yes today." The unit was colder than the air outside, a corrugated throat breathing dust. Inside, a plastic bin with a cracked lid held sketchbooks, a cheap hairbrush, a blue hoodie rolled tight, and a stack of sealed envelopes addressed to no one. Salazar didn't open them. He tagged and bagged and waited for the warrant to catch up with his restraint. What he could examine was a pocket calendar tucked into the hoodie's sleeve. Days were scratched out with small, stubborn X's. Some dates held single words. Oxygen. Quiet. The handwriting matched documents from Maya's employment file 2 apartments ago. The last entry sat alone on a page and used letters like teeth, storage above garage. Neighbors had reported nothing but the ordinary. Victor's garage door had squealed when winter shrank the metal. Contractors had come once to replace the weather seal. Nobody looked up. Why would they? Salazar did at 7:11 p.m., standing in the driveway with his coat unbuttoned because urgency outruns cold. He traced the lines of new screws along the soffit. He saw sealant smeared over a seam that shouldn't need it. He made the call for a warrant with the voice of a man who didn't enjoy being right. They kept the tone even in the room where decisions leaned forward. "If you're still with us now, stay." The next minutes matter more than the last. Not because there's a twist waiting like a trap, but because the work is slower than the rumors and better than the myths. The record has shape if you give it light long enough. They mapped utility usage for the property, flagged a winter week with a surge on outlets nobody used. They pulled permits and found none for insulation, none for electrical, none for structural changes. Silence had forms. You could file them if you knew the names. At 10:02 p.m., a message landed in the department's tip inbox. No greeting. No signature. A set of GPS coordinates, a photo of weathered rafters, and a single line typed like a dare. "Check the hatch." Salazar stared at the image, then at Klein, then at Arya. No one spoke. The photo was close, almost claustrophobic, the kind of angle you get when you keep your head down and your hands steady. Dust motes glittered along a beam. A shadow cut across the frame like a finger laid against a mouth. The hatch had been painted to match the ceiling, but paint doesn't erase hinges. The warrant came through on a cold afternoon that made breath look like evidence. Salazar read it once more on the hood of his cruiser, then walked it to the door while uniforms fanned out along the property line. Victor Calderon opened with a flattened smile and a cardigan that tried too hard to be neighborly. He asked if there was a mistake. Salazar didn't answer the question. He stepped inside and let the house reply. Garages tell the truth first. The air smelled of oil and something chalky, a sting of cured sealant that overpowered winter. The fold-down ladder to the overhead storage sagged a fraction, as if it knew its next act. Arya stood beneath the beam and framed the soffit with her phone, photographing screw heads that didn't match the others along the run. New metal against old wood is a kind of confession. Klein trailed a step behind, hands in his coat pockets like a man restraining his own impulse to touch. He traced the seam of paint with his eyes and said nothing. In the living room, Elena Ruiz sat on the edge of an armchair she hadn't chosen, fingers laced so tight the knuckles blanched. She wasn't supposed to be here during the search, but the law leaves room for mothers when paperwork catches up to fear. Victor hovered near the kitchen island, rehearsing patience, then performed concern. He asked about process. He suggested coffee. He kept repeating that he had a meeting later, as if schedules could negotiate with the clock on the warrant. Salazar nodded without hearing him and moved toward the garage again. The tip had said hatch. The calendar had said roof. The utility spike had said someone lived where no permit did. The ladder groaned. Dust rained in a fine gray veil. Salazar pushed up the panel and felt it stick, then release like a held breath. The cavity above was hotter than the room below. Heat gathers where air isn't supposed to. Two portable panels threw off a thin hum, bleached by fiberglass insulation tacked in awkward squares. A camping mat lay against the far joist, compressions pressed into it like a sentence written with elbows and ribs. An extension cord crossed the span to a cheap power strip. Tape residue formed dark halos around anchor points where something had once been secured and then removed. The plastic window of a Rubbermaid bin had fogged from the inside and then cleared, leaving a map of dried crescents. Arya climbed after Salazar and steadied herself with a hand on the truss. She sifted the bin without drama. A cracked makeup compact, a short pencil, a pack of earplugs, a folded index card with 3 words written flat as a command: stay very still. She found no letters, no photographs, no wallet. People who build rooms like this learn what to remove first. Klein passed up a paper mask and gloves. They worked in quiet that made every breath a metric. The HVAC register near the ridge vent had been unscrewed and reattached at least once. Salazar loosened it again and reached into the duct. His fingertips brushed grit, then plastic. He pinched and pulled until a microSD card slid into his palm, light as a lie. Arya labeled a bag and sealed it around the card while the attic held its air and waited. They carried the bag down like a candle. In the kitchen, Victor's rally folded. He bristled at the attic search and found indignation too late. He tried distance next, a step back, a sigh that intended to be wounded. He asked for a lawyer and got a chair. Elena stood. She didn't speak to him. She didn't look at him. She watched Salazar hand the bag to the tech and then watched the tech walk past the places where she'd once looked for her daughter's face in framed photographs and found only landscapes. The lab laptop came alive on the dining table because procedure travels with people who expect resistance. The card mounted, offered 3 dated clips, and froze for a moment that made the room forget how to move. The first file opened to the small rectangle of a clinic exam room. The angle was off, slightly too low, as if the device had been tucked inside clothing or behind a tissue box. The shot framed a table edge, a white coat moving in and out, and a wrist with a hospital band. Sound bled thin but usable. A man's voice filled answers before a softer voice could shape silence into words. The camera shivered once, then steadied. A nurse's hand entered the frame and paused, the nails short and clean, the pause long enough to be meaning. The machine beeped. Paper chattered. Somewhere, someone breathed too fast. Klein recognized his own posture before his mind accepted the context. The date stamp matched the night he'd logged the printer error. The graphic overlay, faint, almost lost, showed numbers Priya had described as a body writing down what it couldn't say out loud. Arya's intake marked the moment she placed her pen just to the right of the wrong name. In the clip, the pen hovered, then tapped the margin where the annotation later bled. And under the noise, softer than the hum, a woman's voice pressed a sentence into the room like a secret braced against teeth. I can't breathe. They played the second clip. The camera faced darkness for a count of 8, then caught light slipping through a seam above a garage. The third clip failed to open. The progress bar hiccuped, retreated, and stopped. Techs know the feeling when a file understands it holds leverage. The card had given them the first room. It was still holding the second. Salazar looked at Victor and saw a man deciding which story to choose next. The ceiling ticked as heat shifted in the joists. Somewhere above, a screw settled with a tiny elastic squeal, like a hinge remembering it had been used. No one in the house spoke for a full 10 seconds. The quiet had a shape now, and it pointed up. The card surrendered only what it chose. The first clip proved the room and the pressure. The second showed a sliver of light from the garage seam. The third died on the loading bar like a dare. Salazar didn't waste the threat. He split the evidence tree, sent a forensic image to the lab, and kept the original sealed. You don't bargain with a file that knows it matters. He pivoted to something less dramatic and more stubborn: paper. Paper, when it lies, does it slowly. Arya retrieved the intake forms from deep storage. The folders smelled of dust and copier heat, that faint baked scent that turns offices into archives. She laid out the 2018 chart on a clean table and placed a magnifier over the consent signature that authorized the clinic to discharge without a transfer. The flourish didn't match Maya's job application on record with HR from 2 years earlier. Curves tightened where they were usually open, the baseline dipped, the cross-stroke on the T bent late. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was a pulse that missed a beat. Dr. Priya joined them and asked for a non-invasive ink analysis. The lab tech arrived with a portable spectrometer, apologized to the table for the indignity, and went to work. Dyes age, binders oxidize, time leaves fingerprints chemical tests can read. The result was clean and impolite. The consent lines were written months after the dated header. Someone had altered the past, then filed it as routine. Klein handed over the ultrasound service logs. Serial numbers, probe head replacements, calibration dates, each entry with a technician's initials as neat as scaffolding. He looked less haunted now, more resolute. Shame had moved to the back seat so responsibility could drive. He asked Priya to walk Salazar through the waveform again. She did, patient but unsparing. Under stress, she said, the body speaks softly at first. It economizes. It trades brightness for endurance. Those trades register as small measurements that add up, and when they add up, they make a case history louder than any witness who can't speak. She pointed at the overlay. This is a person telling you, in organs and intervals, that days were long and food was thin and someone else chose where they slept. Elena stood at the window as if the glass could translate her hope into coordinates. She held her phone like a relic she refused to pray to. When Arya mentioned the altered consent, Elena didn't gasp or rage. She nodded once, a brittle acknowledgement that the world had finally started to match what her gut had screamed for years. She asked if the clinic had copies of emergency referrals. Arya found one in the scan log, unsigned, queued but never printed. That, Salazar said softly, is a timeline with a missing hour. Adult Protective Services sent Rebecca Cole, a caseworker who knew how to sit with silence until it loosened its jaw. She outlined a safety plan as if Maya might be listening from the next room. If contact happens, keep it short. Use neutral words. Establish choices that don't look like ultimatums. Create paths that feel possible. Elena listened without interrupting. She practiced 2 sentences until her voice didn't break. I can come to you. You decide when. Permits revealed what everyone suspected and no one could prove until now. There were no permits. No request to insulate, no electrical, no structural changes for the garage. Yet the utility ledger from last winter showed a steady nighttime draw that belonged to lights, to small heaters, to devices people use when they are staying where they shouldn't be staying. A contractor's invoice surfaced in Victor's email, a weather seal replacement paid in cash, weekend work, no letterhead. The name matched a handyman who had once filed for a license, failed the background check, and kept hustling. Salazar added a second line to the suspect board. Control often outsources its first walls. They ran the micro-SD image through recovery tools. Sectors whispered up fragments. A frame of rafters, the corner of a portable solar panel, the soft blur of denim. Not enough to show a face, enough to place a body. Meanwhile, Arya fed the attic photos to Priya, who traced thermal patterns where insulation sagged. The sag aligned with joists recently stressed by weight. Next to those dips, tape ghosts rimmed a square that matched the footprint of a storage trunk, one that wasn't there now. At dusk, a clerk from a neighborhood shipping center called the tip line. A man had mailed a heavy box to a P.O. box across town and paid for overnight forwarding to a storage facility outside city limits. The sender used a fake name, but the security camera caught his gait as he left. People disguise faces, they rarely disguise knees. Salazar pulled Victor's DMV footage and played it side by side with the clerk's video. The stride matched within a margin that makes juries lean forward. They opened the envelopes from Maya's storage under warrant. No cries for help. No diary of horrors. Receipts, clipped and dated. Brand of sealant. Type of screws. A note in her unfussy hand. Count them twice. She had built a ledger. She had left it where a future could find it. The room went very quiet. The case had stopped being a hunt for a ghost and had become a conversation with someone who knew we were coming. Salazar closed the folder and looked at the attic hatch a final time, as if light might answer. Then his phone vibrated, a text from a number that had sent coordinates once, now sending 4 words that rearranged the night. She's moving, follow the quiet. The text came from the same number that had dropped coordinates and photos without a signature. She's moving, follow the quiet. Salazar didn't ask the phone to explain. He paged the small night detail, kept the sirens off, and drove with the windows cracked just enough to hear the city breathe. Quiet wasn't poetry, it was logistics. People shift under cover of noise when they want anonymity. They shift under cover of quiet when they want control. He mapped the phrase onto the utility surge they'd flagged weeks earlier and drew a triangle, Victor's Block, a shipping center with overnight forwarding, and the edge of an industrial park where gravel-damped sound and broken sodium lamps made shadows look like law. Arya rode in Klein's sedan behind the second unit. She held the storage ledger Maya had built out of receipts and kept running her thumb along the page where the handwriting said count them twice. Elena sat next to Klein, both hands flat on her knees, eyes steady. Rebecca Cole from APS had coached her down to 2 lines and 3 breaths. I can come to you. You decide when. Elena practiced them until her mouth knew the weight of each word. In the rear view, Klein watched her shoulders square and thought about how some injuries responded to time and others only to witnesses. They reached the industrial park past midnight. The lot was a dictionary of neglect. Rust, thistle, a cinder block wall marked by tags no one had bothered to paint over. Salazar parked in shadow opposite a low-slung building with a second-story catwalk and a corrugated roof patched in a line. In the distance, a generator purred, almost polite. Follow the quiet, he repeated, stepping into the cold. Quiet meant insulation. Quiet meant distance from street noise. Quiet meant a place that promised to hold a secret without echo. 2 units flanked the building, moving slow, hands low, lights off. The door at ground level was chained, but the paint on the chain's links was unscarred. It had been dressed to look like it worked. Salazar pointed up. A maintenance ladder climbed to the catwalk where a narrow service door sat a fraction ajar. Arya exhaled through her teeth. On the wind you could smell disinfectant and something metallic that wasn't blood and wasn't entirely clean either, like the residual taste after a battery touches your tongue. They entered without spectacle. The interior swallowed their footfalls and dried them into a soft thud. A corridor stretched left and right, bare conduits overhead, concrete that kept its own weather. The generator's purr was closer now, channeled through a half-open door into a room that had once been something else and was now, unmistakably, designed to keep a person. Not elaborate. Not theatrical. A locked interior door with a small grate. A cheap cot with the middle sagging. A cooler with bottled water. A portable heater aimed at a corner like a pet. Tape ghosts marked where restraints had been, but the tape was gone. The trunk-size rectangle in the insulation overhead gleamed with a fresh seam. This was the template the attic had copied without a permit and without mercy. Maya? Elena said, not loud, not timid. A word offered across a threshold like a hand held steady. Silence took a step, then another, then returned a sound that might have been a cough or a swallowed name. Salazar nodded once to the hall. An officer slid the master key into the lock and turned slow. The door opened with the reluctant pop of cheap wood meeting cheaper hardware. Inside, the heat pooled weirdly, like a man-made summer that hadn't learned where to settle. A figure unfolded from the corner, hair tucked back under a knit cap, eyes adjusting, spine stiff with a posture that said she was a woman, not a rumor, and she would not flinch just because a room changed its rules. Maya looked first at Arya, then at Klein, and finally at Elena. She wasn't surprised. She was measuring. I'm fine, she said, voice low and hoarse but ironed flat. Is he here? Elena's mouth opened, then held. I can come to you, she said, nearly whispering. You decide when. It landed like it was supposed to. Maya's shoulders softened a degree you could measure. She stepped forward 1 pace, stopped, and held up a hand. "One more box," she said. "Then we leave." She led them to a utility nook. The box sat under a sagging coil of cable. On top was a folded painter's sheet that looked like trash. Inside were trimmed labels from sealant tubes, hardware store receipts, a scrap of paper with 3 addresses and 2 initials, and a disposable phone, powered down. Salazar bagged everything. Klein glanced at Priya's notes in his head and read the ledger the way she taught him, as a statement, not a story. Maya's hands were steady. She wasn't trembling, she was cataloging goodbyes. The noise when it came wasn't loud, it was sharp. Metal skipped on metal above them, a stutter step on the catwalk. Victor's face appeared in the doorway with a slice of street light across his jaw. He didn't lunge. He recalculated. "This is my property," he said, voice smooth and absurd, like manners could repossess a room. Salazar didn't give the speech about warrants. He moved. The struggle was contained, ugly, and brief, all elbows and friction and quiet commands that did not need to be repeated. The cuffs clicked and the air in the room changed its shape as if the walls had just learned a different gravity. Maya didn't look at Victor once. She reached for Elena's forearm and found it. They stood like that without talking, 2 people translating fear into a grip that could finally be returned. Arya checked vitals with a touch that was clinical and kind, counted the pulse she'd once had to imagine from a graph, and nodded to Klein. He nodded back. It wasn't triumph, it was accounting. Outside, the night smelled like cold metal and relief. The generator wound down until its purr matched a human breath at rest. Salazar's phone buzzed again. The same number, a new message with coordinates farther south and a name none of them had spoken aloud yet. The new coordinates pointed to a storage yard wedged between a rail spur and a strip of mechanic shops. Quiet by design, louder only when you wanted a train to cover the sound of hinges. The text included a single name. Hargis. Salazar didn't need the DMV cross-check to remember it. Hargis had failed a background check years earlier, kept working cash jobs, and signed a weather seal invoice Victor had paid off the books. Control had built its first walls with borrowed hands. They hit the yard before dawn. Breath fogged. Tires hissed on gravel. A clerk with a thermos and an old Broncos beanie gestured toward a row of units and shrugged like he already regretted being awake. The padlock on Unit 27 looked new against a door that didn't. Salazar read the warrant, then cut the lock. What waited inside felt like a blunt reply to every question they had asked for 5 years. A contractor's tote, labeled with a faded barcode, held tubs of acoustic sealant, boxes of wood screws, and a ledger with entries written in 2 different hands. One column tracked materials, the other tracked cash. Several lines were circled. VC beside the larger totals. RH beside the initials next to labor after hours. Arya lifted a portable drive from a nest of cloth rags. It wasn't hidden, it was neglected, as if contempt could do the job of secrecy. Tech imaged it on site while officers moved through the rest of the unit. The drive offered folders with construction photos, attic joists, foam boards cut wrong then recut, a hatch in progress, overhead shots of the industrial loft. A gloved hand entered frame once, freckles visible past the cuff. The camera's timestamp matched winter evenings when the neighborhood remembered Victor's garage door screaming against the cold. People had heard the noise. No one had asked why noise needed bearing. Hargis arrived minutes later in a dented pickup, shoulders squared in the way of men who believe posture can rewrite outcomes. He claimed he just stored tools there. He said he didn't know Victor well. He said a lot of things that wobbled under the weight of the ledger. Salazar put him in cuffs with the same economy he'd used on Victor. When a lie collapses, it does it quietly. The air simply stops being useful to it. Klein and Priya met them at Memorial Hospital to brief the OB team while APS coordinated safe housing and legal counsel. Maya didn't need anyone to narrate what she'd lived, but she did let professionals map what her body had carried and what it could set down. Priya explained risks without poetry. Steroid courses had done their work years earlier. Today's concern was endurance, nutrition, sleep, distance from stress. Maya listened with her eyes on Elena's hand, and when the consult ended, she leaned once into her mother's shoulder and stood back up. She wasn't fragile. She was forward. In interview rooms that smelled like copy paper and burnt coffee, the case acquired edges. The second clip on the microSD, the one that taunted the progress bar, yielded after forensic coaxing. It showed the attic space fully built and stocked, then stripped. A pair of hands packed a trunk and slid the trunk across joists to the hatch. No faces. But the sleeves matched a fleece Hargis wore in a social photo posted months after the clinic visit. The gate from the shipping center matched too, frame by frame. The third file on the drive, the one that had refused to open in Victor's kitchen, contained the shortest video and the clearest act. The garage hatch wiped clean. Screws replaced in an alternating pattern to disguise torque marks. A fingertip pressed paint into the seam. Quiet imported into a neighborhood that had been told to mind its own business. Charges assembled themselves. Unlawful imprisonment, assault on an adult, tampering with evidence, conspiracy. Salazar didn't rush the stack, he arranged it. The prosecutor would decide what to play first. Elena didn't ask about statutes. She asked if after hours meant Hargis had heard a voice and kept working anyway. No one answered, because the only answer is indecent and obvious. There aren't speeches at the end of nights like this. There are forms, and there are hands that don't let go when they used to. Rebecca Cole went over safety again and wrote down numbers even though they were already saved. Arya, who had learned to trust discipline over fury, threaded a small bracelet onto Maya's wrist, an elastic thing with a bronze bead she kept in her locker for days that asked too much. Klein, who had built a raft out of should-haves, told Maya he would testify and then asked what else needed to be retrieved from the storage unit. Maya said one thing: the hoodie. It was old, and it was hers, and she had decided it would not be a relic. The case didn't make the city kinder. It made a corridor of it safer. Hargis folded fast. Greed takes plea deals when devotion doesn't. Victor tried to be theatrical in court and failed because juries listen for timestamps and knees and ink that ages wrong. Maya chose to read a statement that didn't apologize for surviving. Elena stood behind her without touching her, the new way they had learned to say "I'm here." When they left the courthouse, the sky over the front range had the thin, ruthless clarity of winter. Arya locked eyes with Klein, and the tiniest shrug passed between them, an agreement to keep looking at margins. Salazar texted 2 words to his own number and left them unread on purpose. Check hatch. We keep what we pay attention to. We lose what we excuse. If you feel control tightening, tell someone who measures time and not rumors. And if you're the someone listening, hold the facts steady until a person can step into them without breaking.